Strategically located along the 21st century maritime Silk Road, Sri Lanka, the pearl of the Indian Ocean, the key link between the East and the West, offers access to a thriving region poised for accelerated growth. Rising from the seas of Sri Lanka, Port City Colombo is a large-scale reclamation and city development project undertaken jointly by China Communications Construction Company, a Fortune 500 company, and the government of Sri Lanka. Spanning 269 hectares, Port City Colombo, when fully developed, will have a total gross floor area of more than 5.7 million square meters. A modern city where people can work, live, and play. The government of Sri Lanka is actively working on turning this into an international financial city. With new commercial legislation modeled after British laws, coupled with preferential tax, custom, immigration regulations, and other attractive policies, Port City Colombo will attract top multinational corporations and global talent. A state-of-the-art convention and exhibition center capable of hosting large-scale international events will position Port City Colombo as the new hub for business and region. Port City Colombo will also be the city concept in Sri Lanka, where IT expertise using cloud computing and the latest cutting-edge technology creates a seamless living environment, making smart living, smart working, and smart estate management a reality. Port City Colombo has adopted the latest sustainable city concepts, with emphasis on a people-friendly environment using the transit-oriented developments concept to minimize commuting, further enhances the project's sustainability. Port City Colombo will be the most livable city and desired travel destination in the South Asian region, with a 2-kilometer sandy beach, a water channel that flows through the middle of the city, a central park with lush greenery and park connectors traversing across its length and breadth, with the best of healthcare and education. Port City Colombo will be amongst the very best top international cities, world-class hospitality, integrated resort and theme park, a retail destination that is home to the best of international brands and local retailers, a luxury marina will make Port City Colombo a top tourist destination. Building a world-class city for South Asia. Port City Colombo.
TV. So that's on Pure TV, channel 20. Now, advance from overseas and some investors are eagerly waiting to be able to recognize and understand the value that has been brought to Sri Lanka, the value proposal by way of Port City. So the whole theme how Port City can become the game changer for Sri Lanka's economic growth trajectory. Quite a mouthful there. But we would like to also mention that this is a critical analysis, with a little emphasis on the word analysis. Critical, yes. So what that means is not to criticize, but to be able to engage in a point-by-point review of what it is that could make this whole program of activity, this planned project, work for Sri Lanka's economy or economic growth. Now, we do recognize that there has been a great deal of interest that has been generated from all sides on account of this project, from whenever it began to be proposed and spoken of. So there are layers or even platforms of interest that have been going on. And geopolitics and sovereignty issues have been brought up. The national and local politics and policies have also been cause of agitation, as is well known by now. Laws and jurisprudence, how they apply. Then to Central Bank of Sri Lanka, what about the fiscal management of a facility such as this? Also a cause of anxiety and discussion. And of course, added to all of that is also the environment that has been. None of those are in this critical analysis we would just like to mention. Those are discussed at a different platform, but this is a critical analysis of what might be possible and would be good for Sri Lanka. So it is a given. The port city is an existential project. It is here and it is likely to stay. So what do we make of it? That's the whole idea. And just before we have our keynote speaker, we would like it to be understood by all of our viewers, wherever they are, that this is not unique. A project such as we have here has also been tried and experimented with by other countries, and other localities have been brought into this realm of special economic zone. Here's one, and this is in Dubai. And we would like to invite the audience to have a quick look at this presentation on screen.
يسعدني اليوم إطلاق آلية الثانية هي تأسيس مركز دبي المالي العالمي.
Established in 2004, with just 19 firms and a workforce of 75 professionals, the center has become the leading financial hub for the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia region. Today, more than 23,000 professionals work across over 2,000 companies in the district, including the leading regional and global players in the financial services industry. The place of choice for entrepreneurs and cutting-edge technologies, an established district, a world-class destination, a vibrant community. And now, introducing the next chapter of DIFC, leading the way towards a new financial landscape. With around 80% of the original DIFC master plan already complete, this new offering will complement the center's existing A-grade corporate office spaces. Building on an internationally recognized ecosystem complemented by Dubai's infrastructure and connectivity, we have designed a sustainable home for clients of a different nature, encouraging financial innovation and experimentation. A place for co-workers, a place for financial techies, a place for entrepreneurs, a place for researchers, a place for innovators, a place for their families, a place for makers, a place for learners. DIFC 2.0 is a place for all.
Okay, so that is going on and has been going on in Dubai. Now, similarly, there have been other projects in different parts of the globe, and an appraisal of those now will be brought into this particular discussion. Two keynotes. They are Natarajan Shankar and Saurabh Bakewal, and both of them are from Boston Consulting Group. So let me hand over the proceedings to Natarajan and Saurabh. Thank you very much.
Hi, good evening. My name is Saurabh Bakliwal. I hope you can hear me clearly. Yes, hi, good evening. My name is Saurabh Bakliwal, and I am a managing director partner with BCG. I've had the opportunity to work with many economic clusters around the region in my role as the overall infrastructure and real estate and economic development head of BCG for Asia Pacific. It's a real pleasure to be part of this discussion and to deliver this keynote speak, proceeding without a doubt, what will be a very thoughtful discussion with our eminent panelists. Let me begin by saying that, having seen so many economic clusters develop, be successful around the region, and potentially some also failing. But, when I look at Port City in my mind, no doubt this is a very ambitious and bold program and has the potential to be the game changer for Sri Lanka. If this is executed successfully, and the operational word is execution, this can definitely unlock a virtual cycle of growth for many years to come for the country. Thus, in turn, which often is the objective of these economic clusters, create significant employment opportunities and economic prosperity for the people of Sri Lanka. Now, of course, given the boldness of this project and policy, it's quite natural, to have a debate on the merits and demerits of certain elements of the program. But as the introduction and the speaker was saying, that the idea of this is to make this initiative even more stronger and successful. And I'm sure through these discussions like these, we can bring in the required understanding and alignment and be able to move ahead with clarity and conviction. So with the thought, in our keynote today, me and my colleague Natarajan, we wanted to touch upon three key questions that could help set up the conversation later. One, why is there really a need of setting up these kinds of economic clusters, especially in countries which are emerging, which are on a growth trajectory, which needs to drive investments as well as set up new centers of capabilities, either across sectors or across capabilities. So that's the first question: why there is a need for economic clusters. Second, what can Sri Lanka hope to achieve through this initiative? And finally, yes, the ambition is bold, the intent is great, but how do we really execute this so that this is successful? Let me start by talking about the first point, and Natarajan, if you could go to the next page, please. So if you think of economic clusters, what I get reminded of is a very interesting thought piece that Michael Porter, all of us know him. He's one of the thought leaders of our generation. Wrote in HBR actually a couple of decades back, right? He said that if you look at the economic map of the world today, it is dominated by clusters of unusual competitive success in specific fields, in specific sectors, and these are formed by co-located, interconnected companies. Now, what's more interesting is that these are not often driven by specific location advantage, be a natural resource or a specific kind of advantage of being at a certain location. Given that in the world today, capital, goods, information, technology can be easily transferred and accessed around the world, the advantage of these clusters is not being location specific. The advantage really comes in from creating an ecosystem where companies can come together and deepen the skill and drive innovation. If you think of the electronic cluster in Taiwan, the pharma cluster in India, a shoe manufacturing cluster in Thailand, none of these have any specific location advantage. But yet, if you think of electronics, you think of Taiwan. And today, as we were discussing, if you think of pharma and vaccine manufacturing, often India comes across as the manufacturing hub. and interestingly also, many countries who have tried to replicate this success have found it very difficult to do that, given the inherent advantage that these clusters can create. But then, the advantage of this cluster is by definition also a disadvantage that emerging economies, countries who are trying to, attract investments, build new sectors need to overcome. And I think this is where the economic cluster concept, the idea of, building economic cluster through a very focused infrastructure and policy intervention makes a lot of sense. There are 5 important roles that an economic cluster in our mind plays in overcoming this disadvantage and over time hopefully building a competitive advantage for the country. First, these economic clusters are designed in a way to overcome the economic cost disadvantage. Now, if you think of any company in the world, they're all driven by the motive of generating profits, generating returns for the shareholders. So one of the important and critical condition is that when I invest somewhere, we should be able to generate return. We should be able to compete globally and be competitive, right? So as they enter a new geography, how can you make it attractive for them by policy interventions? It could be financial, non-financial incentives. It could be in terms of tax breaks, capital subsidies, duty drawbacks, or even non-financial. For example, creating a very efficient infrastructure. But how do you create elements in the economic cluster that overcomes this cost disadvantage, at least in the initial years? Second, these clusters are designed also to focus on few sectors or few capabilities. It could even be an R&D park, a knowledge park, right? Where you're trying to drive digital innovation across sectors, but they're always designed around a few themes. And the idea is to be able to, over time, attract investments in the same sector, in the same domain, so that the ecosystem effect starts getting unlocked. You start having people co-locating, working with each other, driving efficiency both in cost, speed to market, but also collaboration and innovation. Third, I think any country which is trying to build a new sector will obviously face the question of saying, how do we get the right skills, talent, that is required, for the sector. And that is where in the initial years, it also becomes very important to be able to attract the right global talent. And that, if you think of, successful clusters around the world, and Dubai, Hong Kong, Singapore have done this quite successfully, is to be able to create an environment that, allows for global talent to feel that they want to come in, participate in this, in this program, relocate, and it could be in terms of the work, live, play, integrated development that even the port city is aiming to make. But also it could be in terms of some additional incentives like a personal income tax, rebate for a few years, right? Fourth, and I think this is again a very important point, right? You can create the right economic environment, you can create the right attraction for talent, but risk is a very important part of how companies, global corporations take decision. Even more important than probably ease of doing business. So as they're entering new geographies, a very important part of the investment thesis is how do we address and manage risks. And successful clusters around the world have addressed this question very, very thoughtfully, and have created the right policy enablers to be able to manage this for the companies as they're looking to enter and invest in the market. So setting up let's say international laws for global businesses, or neutral arbitration centers, or relaxed labor laws. All of these are interventions that help reduce the risk of doing business, and hence make it more attractive for a company to choose the targeted geography versus a competition. And finally, I would say the economic cluster has to be designed in a way that it is able to set up a virtuous cycle, create an economic multiplier, and hence hopefully quickly start regenerating returns to be able to reinvest either in the same cluster to expand, or maybe create new clusters of growth. And what better example than China here? I think if there is any country which has used this model very successfully over decades, and now has created itself as the manufacturing powerhouse, but also now a knowledge powerhouse by creating these very, very strong ecosystems and clusters of of the target industries. So in summary, these are the 5 reasons why we think a well-designed economic cluster plays a very important role in the initial years of setting up an industry or a sector in a country. There are many, many examples of successful economic clusters. In the introduction also, this was being talked about. We all know about the successful models of Singapore, China. My colleague Natarajan will actually take us through a case study of Dubai, where he'll share what they did to become successful. And frankly, there is not one template, but there are several interesting learnings that can be taken away. Though I just wanted to quickly share a trivia on the Shannon economic cluster, and I don't know if our viewers and audience are aware of this, but it's considered probably as the first economic cluster ever set up in the world. This was set up in 1956. Imagine a sleepy small town like Shannon setting up an economic cluster, and today generating $500 million worth of economic activity from that one location. Today, this contributes 10% of the GDP of Ireland. And if you go and look at the incentives that is offered today, it is nothing different than anything else offered in Ireland. So the same tax rate, no additional incentive. But because of years of development of this cluster, there is so much stickiness now in this hub that companies continue to operate and continue to reinvest. So with that, let me hand over to my colleague Natarajan to talk about as we think about executing this, what are the important success factors for Sri Lanka to keep in mind as they think of making this a success. Thank you.
Thanks, Saurabh. I hope my voice is also clear. So, to take off from where Saurabh left, I think there are multiple clusters, as we spoke about, which have been successful, but for each of the successful clusters, also a set which has not. So as we really look at what makes an economic cluster successful, we've tried to bring out three key themes, and maybe as you all go through the panel, many of these areas will also come up in the discussion. The first is really a very deep understanding of the target opportunity and the investor pools. And there it's about understanding the sectors, the subsectors, clearly a deep view of the investors for whom this essentially will make sense, and really thinking through that very carefully. The second is being able to articulate a compelling value proposition for each of these target sectors and subsectors. Now, in order to make the value proposition compelling, a lot of the economic clusters typically do use a mix of financial and non-financial incentives, in addition to some of the other elements which Saurabh spoke about earlier, in terms of ensuring that the risks are managed, in the minds of the potential investors coming in. And the third is really many of the clusters which have succeeded have had early wins and clear anchor investors, and this is a very critical point to activate the virtuous cycle. And I think I can't deliberate on the importance of the third factor as much as the first two, because that really creates the initial quick wins and ensures that the cluster is really set up for success. I think, as we were mentioning, there are also many of the clusters which not succeeded for one, two, or all the reasons put down here. There are clusters which have been ahead of time, much beyond the time for those sectors, the value proposition not necessarily clearly laid out, or the inability to really attract anchor investors, leading to recreation of what really should be part of that cluster many times over. I think before wrapping up our presentation, the only last part I want to touch upon is an example from Dubai. And, we did see a video of one of the clusters earlier, but there are multiple successful clusters over the world. And one of them, if we really look at DMCC Dubai, it's created a lot of employment. It is actually got to many of the objectives in terms of, if you look at the $320 billion value of contract traded in 2020, and is really a end-to-end destination as originally envisaged. When we really look at some of the reasons and think of the same framework along which we laid out what makes an economic cluster a success, I think the economic and development logic was laid out very clearly, which is becoming a main trade hub for commodities globally. And the way the target sectors were defined whether it's across commodities trade, finance and services, or any of the others mentioned in this page, they've been able to really drive anchor investors and the right quality of investors along each of these target sectors. But that comes from having a very clear sense of the economic value proposition for each of these sectors, for which financial and non-financial incentives do become an important part of it. In this case, there was as you can see below on the slide, the financial incentives did include a fair level of full tax exemption, capital repatriation, limited currency restrictions, and also in terms of the offerings of the non-financial incentives, a clear location, infrastructure, IT systems, or in terms of the employment being flexible, as well as other elements such as the legal support, which was being mentioned earlier. So I think to wrap up the keynote, as we really look at it, one of the areas which may be useful to deliberate upon is what will really make Port City a success along the elements we have laid out. What are really, what is the clear opportunity and the target investor pools being targeted? What is the compelling value proposition in terms of the entire economic proposition? Incentives is one part of it. It's not, it is a prerequisite, but that alone will not ensure that there's a strong value proposition. So what is really the compelling value proposition? And, what's the right way to get the early wins and secure the anchor investors? Because in our experience, that's one of the critical elements to make these clusters a success. So with that, I will end this keynote and hand it back to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natarajan, as well as Saurabh. We appreciate very much that analysis, and very quickly too, that you covered all of that ground. But we appreciated that there are some very key, or shall we say, 3 pillars that have a great deal to do with the success of a project like this. And there are lessons to be learned from the other models that exist elsewhere on the planet. Now, at this juncture, we would like very much to invite the Honorable State Minister for Money and Capital Markets and State Enterprise Reforms, Mr. Ajit Nivad Kabral. And from his remote location, he will deal with this particular topic. And at the end of that, if he's willing, we will have Dinesh Veerakodi maybe directing a couple of questions just to clarify a point or two. So over to you, Mr. Kabral.
Thank you, Arun. Thank you, and good evening to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here this evening to share a few thoughts on a very important topic, the port city, which has attracted a lot of attention. And I'm particularly glad that this kind of analysis, as Arun mentioned, critical analysis is being organized by all these important agencies in order to establish what's really the ground situation with regard to this project. Now, the Boston Consulting Group from India was very specific in their analysis, which was extremely helpful. And the analogies that they drew, as well as the way in which other countries have benefited by this kind of economic clusters, was very helpful. So it's important for us to understand that this project is all about implementation. It has all the features that perhaps Shannon has been offering: Dubai, Singapore, Malaysia, Shenzhen. All those will be our competitors. We will have to attract new investment to come into Sri Lanka at this juncture and ensure that that investment is good for them and good for Sri Lanka. So I think it's important that we reflect on a few of those points that will deliver these benefits to Sri Lanka. Firstly, any agency that we have in authority to provide the support to the investors who are coming into Sri Lanka should be able to have their matters attended to with speed. They cannot be rustifying in corridors like what has happened in the past in Sri Lanka. They got to come in, they got to be able to meet with their requirements. That agency which is dealing with it should be able to immediately ensure that they have the necessary wherewithal to move forward. And that's a very important ingredient. that happens in Singapore, and we sometimes say, look, it happens in Singapore in one day. Singapore, after all, is at the top of the list with regard to doing business indicators. So they have got it right. So now we got to compete with them in order to ensure that we can also attract big time investors like the types that Nataraja and Sauron of the port city complex is important, where they would live, where they would have entertainment, where they would go for health facilities, where they would educate their children. All those will be very important factors if you are going to attract top investors of the world. Then the efficiency. Not only should the services work, and there must be actually all these services working 24 hours of the day all the time. And in addition to that, the infrastructure as well as the people must be having the skills in order to be able to provide the services at a very efficient level. Those are not easy to come by, as they mentioned quite rightly, Natarajan and his other member. These are matters that will need specific attention. These won't happen automatically. Training, ensuring that they are of the required quality, standard, all that is important. Then it must be a sought after destination. People must be able to talk about it. Sri Lanka has great things going for it. The location, the our time zone, the geographical positioning, the climate, the fact that we have tourist attractions just a few miles away from the port city. Port city also being one of those, I believe, would be one of the key attractions for the future. The marina. All these will need to be marketed as well as positioned properly so that people will find it interesting to come into Sri Lanka and work, play, and have leisure, as well as educate their children and to be comfortable. Then this last part that I would say is that we should be consistent. People must be able to come into Sri Lanka and not have surprises. They must be able to have a clear understanding of what's going to take place, and that understanding must be there consistently during the period of their investment, hopefully for a long, long time. Now, that is also difficult to achieve, but we need to ensure that we put the structure for that if you are to really do well in this whole exercise. So that's why the crafting of the law was very carefully done. We are going to, after all, attract investment to around 269 hectares of land, 5.7 million built up square meters of built space, additional GDP of around $4.5 billion to come into the country, to $80 billion GDP country. That's a significant amount. And after the construction is over, perhaps around 12 to $15 billion additional GDP. So to achieve that and to have 100,000 people working during the construction period, and perhaps 200,000 in the next 10 years, all these are important facets that we will achieve, but it doesn't come easy. It has to come with consistency. It has to come with a platform which is going to be extremely clearly defined and executed very, very well. The word execution was used by several speakers before me, and I think that's the key. So that's why for our law, we decided that there should be a single window facilitation unit, which we call the Port Commission, Colombo Port Commission itself. Now that will be provided with the space as well as the powers and the responsibilities in order to provide a single window, a single contact point to all investors so that they will be very comfortable with what they do. I won't go into the nitty-gritties of the city itself as well as all the other stuff about that, but I think this is the part that investors are keen to see. They want to ensure that when they come into Sri Lanka, they can have a good business proposition, that their businesses will be protected, their investment is protected, they will have comfortable laws. If they have a dispute, that it will be attended to. If they have a court case, that it will be done fast. Now, all these are very, very important factors. We know about doing business indicators. We know where we are right now. I don't think we are flattered by our position, but we are working on a separate aspect to deal with that situation. But that will take some time. Our goal is for Sri Lanka to be in the 25th position in the world by year 2025. We are working on it through my ministry itself, and I believe we will be able to achieve that. It's a tough call. It's not easy. We know the challenge, but I think we will achieve that. But in the short term, also we need some short-term gains. We need to see that people are able to come to Sri Lanka and have a place in which everything works, that they will be able to have doing business indicators at the top 5 positioning, so that they will feel comfortable that they are able to come in and do business here. So the whole positioning of this port city is that it will be a game changer. In my view, I normally call it a turning point of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has a lot going for it. But at the same time, we have faced many challenges. Right now, we have the challenge of COVID, which has set us back somewhat. But once these new areas of development take place, we will be in a position to go fast and into the future with confidence and with clarity. So that's what the government is trying to achieve. That's what this is all about. And I believe if we get that right, Sri Lanka will definitely change its course of history. We had in the past several instances where we changed history when people didn't believe that certain things could happen in Sri Lanka, but yet it happened. I remember J.R. Jayawardena, when he was president, he wanted to compress the entirety of the Mahaveli program, which was touted for 30 years, into 6. And many people said it cannot be done. When Mahinda Rajapaksa, president, said we are going to finish the war, everyone thought it won't be possible, but we did it in 2 years and 9 months. The infrastructure development that took place was extraordinary in those few years. But now we need another game change. We need another new avenue in which Sri Lanka can go forward with clarity, and with confidence, and with a clear vision that can be implemented strongly and very well. So this is an opportunity for Sri Lanka. This is the turning point for Sri Lanka. And how we get that right is very important. Very soon, the law will be introduced in Parliament. Already the Supreme Court has given its determination. I think from what we can see, from the opinion that we received from the Attorney General, we will have that to be passed in Parliament very shortly, perhaps on the 18th or 19th of May. Once we do that, we will have a commission in place that will be given the responsibilities and the necessary authority to carry forward these tasks, so that they can give proper support to all investors who come in. So that's what Sri Lanka is going to do, and we are excited about it. Naturally, I think it's going to be something that we would like to see the opposition also providing us with the support for that. Ranil, who has been the Prime Minister, is also one person who took this forward, although this was started in 2013 under Ranil. His government also took this forward during this period. Now it's the next stage where President Gotabaya Rajapaksa is having the authority to take this country forward. So let's work together. And with the business people, with the investors, with all the others who are involved in this, I was particularly pleased to see that although the new area was actually developed by a Chinese company, Czech Port City, the ones who are promoting it mostly is BCG India. So that shows how the whole concept is having international support. And we will have international support. We will, in the near future, we will market this extraordinary project in all capitals of the world. We would like to see investment flowing in from the US, from Europe, from the Middle East, from Asia, and I believe we would have that. I very recently undertook a visit to Qatar and to Oman, and at those times, I found that the excitement was there, even for them to come in. So let's see how we do that. Implementation is the key. I'm particularly pleased that all of you are taking the time to understand and study this subject, and I wish you all success. And we, from the government's point of view, we stand ready to support investors, to support all who are involved in this project, so that we can make it a real game changer for Sri Lanka and a true turning point in the history of our nation. Thank you very much.
Now, the Honourable Minister will likely not be staying on to form the panel, but will be taking leave of us now. Before he does that, if you don't mind, we're going to have Mr. Dinesh Veerakodi in his capacity as moderator and, of course, chairman of the host organization, namely ICC Sri Lanka. So, Dinesh, over to you, and you can direct some questions to the Minister.
Thank you, Minister, for joining. this you made a very strong case for the port city. My question to you is, this port city has generated a lot of heat. As a government, how are we addressing some of these issues?
Thank you, Dinesh. It's always nice to respond to your questions. And thank you for having me on this panel. I'm sorry, I need to leave before the end, the reasons that I gave you. This is a good question. See, as you say, it has generated some heat and a lot of debate, which is, I think, useful because it gave us an opportunity to come out and explain this in great detail. If you remember, in the last 2-3 weeks, we have been consistently explaining the project. And that's very important in a transparent society to reflect on each of those questions and to respond. I believe that one of the key reasons as to why this had attracted some negative publicity was also that there was a lot of misapprehension. Some people didn't know exactly what this law entailed. If you remember, I did a visit to the priests in this country and the Mahanayakas and all the other priests, because they also had some doubts, but we cleared all that with proper explanation. I think now there is clarity. There is a very clear understanding that this project is all about positioning Sri Lanka at a very important position in the world to be able to attract investment. And that is the true situation. And we want to give that publicity. And in the next few months, after the law is passed, we would undertake many road shows to all parts of the world and woo investors to come into Sri Lanka and be a part of this whole exercise.
Okay. Thank you, Minister. I request you to stay on 10 minutes. I'll actually put a quick question to Mr. Wickramasinghe and to Honorable N.R. Wickramaratne, and then maybe you can respond to that and close it.
Yes.
Mr. Wickramasinghe, can you hear us?
Yes, can hear you.
Yeah. Right along, you have been telling us that the port city is good for Sri Lanka. So what is really worrying you?
The question of worrying me.
Yeah.
I have said offshore center, a financial center is good for Sri Lanka. It so happened that we put it into the port city. We tore up the idea of a Formula One night racing track and we handed it over there. Other than that, the location could have been anywhere else. That really was not the problem. What's the game plan? From where are we going to find the money? From where are we going to get the investors? How are you going to, if you're going to compete with Dubai and Singapore and others, how are you going to compete? No, none of those facts have been told. Once we know that, we can tell what we agree with and what we don't. But at the moment, it is certainly not, we haven't got a game plan. We don't know what the hinterland for this whole exercise is. We did have one, but I suppose that has changed now. There's a different one. So all I think that is necessary is then you look at it and what you agree with, and what you don't, you announce it. Other than that, the port city concept is not new because under GCEC, we had about 23 square miles. We had the whole of that Katunayaka zone and the area around it, and the whole of the Biyagama Pradeshia Divisional Secretaries Division. We got some of that area out later. So that's been there earlier. It just happened to come in here. The whole concept is not being in the port city. It can be anywhere. But what is it? What is the concept? What is the game plan? What are you looking at? How are you going to compete? If you are going to compete, so that's and how is it going to change the economy? Those are the issues. I think if those can be clarified, then we can really get into a debate on it or discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Mr. Wickramasinghe. Eran, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
For the port city to be a winner, what are the 3 things that we need to address now?
First of all, I might want to say that we are for the port city. We are for, as the former Prime Minister said, for the financial city. Very much with the concept, right? Our differences have been to do more with the law that has been presented. It's gone before the quotes, and I'm sure amendments will follow because we had some reservations on that. And I think we have to get it right. As we see, financial cities take decades to grow, 30, 40 years, one examples we are looking at. And therefore, they outlive presidents and governments. And it's good to have a real discussion between government and opposition and to get it right. Because as you see, ultimately, even in manufacturing zones and things, the most recent studies are beginning to show that the reasons why investors come into countries is not so much because of the tax incentives, which we thought 30 years ago were the main reason, but due to political stability, macroeconomic stability, good infrastructure, availability of supplies, and so forth and so on. So I would say that it's good for us to get it right and to have a discussion with all the stakeholders, not just only with parliamentarians, right, but all the stakeholders, because this is a long-term project and the benefits to the country will only come over the long term. The former Prime Minister also raised a very important thing, which I think the presenters also raised from the BCG group. What is really the target? What is the target market? You see, and how are we actually going to attract them is an important question. And I have no insight into it because we haven't recently been involved. And maybe the minister can probably throw some light on it.
Thank you, Vera. Over to you, Minister.
Thank you. I'm really encouraged by the comments of both Honorable Ranil Wickremesinghe and Honorable Iran, because I think their articulation is very, very apt. They have articulated the fact that they are for this, and I think there's no doubt about that. And we are also very keen to ensure that there is bipartisan support for this law. And we are keen to ensure that wherever there are certain difficulties in implementation, that we would consult the other parties as well. And we have provided that space. There were 21 petitions that went before the Supreme Court. And wherever it was possible those were considered to be appropriate, we had also agreed to certain changes. And I think the new act, once it is being presented in Parliament on the 18th of May, would see certain changes and amendments, some which have been suggested by the Supreme Court, I believe, and some which we have agreed already. So Dinesh, there is no disagreement with regard to the need to have this on a bipartisan basis, because they will outlive all governments. They will be in future being implemented by several other new people that we would be giving the batons over to. Honorable Ranil Wickremesinghe made a very clear indication about the necessity of the game plan. I would agree with him 100% on that. It's necessary for us to have a plan. Already there is a blueprint of the plan. And as he knows very well, in implementation, there would be certain snags that would occur. And during that time, that's why you would have a proper commission with the powers as well as the responsibilities. And they would be the ones who would be ensuring that those are being addressed. So competition is also going to be tough. And I think he mentioned that at the outset itself, which I agree with him totally. There would be competition. Nobody is going to come and say, we are going to come to Sri Lanka just because Sri Lanka is there. We have, of course, the political stability, like what Iran says, and the other ingredients of doing business. We have to get it right. But at the same time, we have to ensure that we compete in the same level. So we need to get our act together to be on par with Singapore, to be on par with Dubai, to be on par with Shenzhen, to be on par with Shannon. And that's not going to be easy. That's why we need to have people of quality, competence, of total integrity, so that we can deliver on those results. GCEC was a good example. At the time that it was formed, I think Honorable Ranil Wickremesinghe's electorate was part of that GCEC operation, so he knows that very well. With a person like Upali Vijayawardena headed it, and President J.R. Jayawardena ran it himself. He was very keen about it. Now, that's why I think one of the important ingredients that this port city also must have the involvement of the president and no less a person to drive it forward. So I'm glad that this act will specifically mention that it will be the president who will be the minister. In case he wishes to, he can nominate someone else. But the a responsibility is cast upon the president himself so that it will be a fast implementation and we can get it going as fast as possible. So we
Yeah.
are adapting to the challenges, and at the same time, we know it's going to be not easy, but we want to see all of the parties together supporting this venture because it's going to be a national turning point.
Yeah. Before we let you go, there were two concerns from some of these questions is about the oversight of the Monetary Board and Parliament. Could you respond to that before you leave, please?
Certainly. The Parliament oversight is established because the fact that any regulation that this commission would make with regard to the way it would do business, the way it would be operating the zones and all that will have to have parliamentary approval. It has to be presented to Parliament, and within 3 months, it has to be approved by Parliament. If it is not approved by Parliament, then it will be null and void. So that Parliament oversight is established. With regard to the Monetary Board, in the case of offshore, as well as any other matters of financial nature, it will be the Monetary Board, but the authority that will deal with it will be the Commission, and the Commission will liaise with the Monetary Board and get the Monetary Board's approval. So the investor will have a single window. That's the whole key to this operation. Investor will not be expected to go to the Monetary Board, to go to the municipality, go to the electricity board, go to the registrar companies, and have that kind of interaction at every level. The interacting point will be the commission. They will take responsibility to meet with the Monetary Board or with the other agencies that provide other services. So they will be the facilitation. So Monetary Board will definitely be a part of overall execution of this project. And one more key item is that there were some concerns about money laundering not being effectively handled there. I can assure you that the law pertaining to anti-money laundering has not been touched whatsoever. So those laws will effectively by the Monetary Board and the Central Bank, and that will not change in any way. So that concern, I knew there was some concerns mentioned, can be put to rest, because whatever the commission does, money laundering laws will be implemented by the central bank and the FIU, and those will remain without any change. And therefore, we can be sure that that part of the concerns have been very.
Okay, thank you. Now, Nishta, you want to ask a final question? Nishta?
Niva, just a quick one. I mean, from one perspective is that Sri Lanka is postponing the tougher route of handling some of the inefficiencies outside the port city, and there will be an uneven playing field in one country. How would you respond to this perspective?
Yeah, I didn't say we'll postpone this. What I mentioned was that we have a tough proposition there because we already have been in 99th position. In the port city, we are starting afresh. We can get that right very easier than the other place. But when you're in the 99th position, and there are so many different areas that we need to work with, that is a tougher proposition. And I don't want to say we'll be 25th. We have to work through the land registries, the registered companies, the Monetary Board, the labor departments. All those are part and parcel of this whole issue of the doing business industry. There are 11 such areas, and we are working on all 11 of them. And that will be a tougher proposition because we got to ensure that all those are also dealt with. So, in my view, it will take time, but each year we have got a game plan for that as well, where we would be improving it from the 99th position over a period of time, be at least the 25th position by the year 2025. That's again a tough proposition because we are thinking about all these agents working collectively in our country, but I think it is doable and we will do our best shot. So, tough proposition, no doubt, but the governments might actually attempt rather than just maintain lukewarm basis where you just go through the normal motions only. So I think it's important to reflect on that. And my ministry is taking that very seriously and would ensure that the doing business indicators will improve right across the country. But in the port city, we want to ensure that all those indicators are at a very high level in other areas like the living, as well as all the other areas like education, health, etc., are also maintained at a very high level and attract the best global investors into the port.
Yeah. Thank you, Minister. I request you to hang on for another 2 minutes because we have Damien, who's our ICC rep in Paris. He has had global exposure about attracting investment. I think it's worthwhile listening to him for 2 minutes. Damien, maybe you can share some of your insights about how other countries are attracting investment into their country.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Dinesh. And I just wanted to say this has been an excellent conversation so far, and really, I don't have a huge amount to add on to what has been said so far there, but a few global contextual points that might be of interest in looking at FDI that we've been observing from the International Chamber of Commerce is, I think this is going to be a really, really competitive environment for everyone. FDI flows dropped by 41% last year, which is the greatest drop for 25 years. Obviously, the global economic environment is getting really, really tough with the pandemic, and there's going to be extraordinary competition. So the standards are going to have to be really high. We're also seeing a trend towards investors and governments both wanting to attract not just quantity of investment, but quality investment as well. So there's a huge focus both in the investor community on how to make sure their portfolios have assets in them that reflect sustainable development goals. And I think this is something that could be considered as well. And then the other sort of contextual point I wanted to raise was that there's a massive infrastructure funding gap as well. And this goes back to the point of competition. The OECD, for instance, has said that $6.9 trillion a year is going to be needed over the next 10 years to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, and the funds aren't really there. So in that broader context, the competition will be tough, and all of the principles that have been spoken about so far, transparency, inclusiveness, stakeholder engagement, getting the right policy settings, are going to be absolutely critical.
Thank you, Damien. Thank you. Ashana, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you,
Yeah,
Dinesh.
Ashana, you're an honorary consul plus chairman of a private bank in Sri Lanka. Plus, I know you do a lot of work with Malaysia. Talk a little bit about what Malaysia is doing with some of the artificial islands.
Well, actually, when you look at financial centers, there's Dubai International Financial Center, Songdo International Business District, which is in Korea, built on reclaimed land, very similar to ours, and Labuan in Malaysia, in Sabah, Malaysia, and it's called Labuan International Business and Financial Center. And Labuan is very interesting. Of course, they focus largely on the offshore banking, and the banking sector in Labuan, the sector remained really financially strong. There are total 59 banks that have been established in Labuan. 40 of them are commercial. 19 of them are investment banks, the likes of JP Morgan, Bank of America, Bank of Nova Scotia, and the list goes on. So in 2019, 5 international banking institutions were established there in Labuan, and 4 of them were investment banks. So it's very interesting what they're doing in Labuan, and not really spoken much about, but 90% of the employees are locals. If you take the loan portfolio analysis as at 2019, it reveals that 66.5% of the borrowers are from Asia and the Pacific, whereas 18% are from Europe and 19% from USA. So there is, I think, a great opportunity, especially in South Asia. World Bank has mentioned that the growth for 2021, without, even with the COVID, that it'll be 7.2%, and that South Asia has the potential to be the next export powerhouse. So, this is a very interesting time to look at Malaysia and what they're doing as well. And presently, there are no international financial centers in South Asia region, other than, of course, Mumbai and Gujarat International Financial Tech City. But, for offshore banking, there are not many options available. So, when competing, I think a lot of the panelists were talking about competing with the other international financial centers. I think this must be taken into account, that some of them like Dubai, Lebuan, and Songdo have done a lot in terms of exemptions, etc. So I think we have an opportunity here to attract investment banks and also, offer them some sort of gateway into South Asia.
Thank you, Ashan. Mr. Vikramasinghe, can you hear us?
Yes, can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can. There's been a lot of talk about the commission, how it should be structured and all that. Given your vast experience, any advice you can offer?
No, I think as far as the commission is concerned, Dinesh, it's a question of getting the correct people in. I don't think you need foreigners for that, but you need an advisory board full of foreigners. But that's not my question. My question really, for which I haven't had an answer, is where are you aiming at? You only have a commission. Either the government must have a game plan as to where going. Now, can a commission, can we compete with Dubai and Singapore? We can't. I mean, whatever you say, then are we going to be a offshore tax haven? Are we going to be a financial center? Are we going to be a special economic zone? And where are we going? What are our markets? How are we going to achieve it? So without that, putting a commission in is just rubber stamping a few applications that you will get. So this is what I want to know. Are we a special economic zone? If you refer to Shenzhen, that is basically industrial manufacturing zone. It's Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Singapore are in Asia. Then you got Dubai. So then where do you get the market? Now, this is what hasn't been said. I think Ashan had said about India, yes. But if you're going to India, how do you get in? How do you work with it? For me, I think India is what we should go for. But it is long term. By 2050, India's GDP will increase fourfold. Pakistan will be fourfold. Bangladesh will be fourfold. Indonesia will only be threefold. Malaysia will be only twofold. And Thailand, twofold. But if you take also, on the other hand, take Pakistan, Bangladesh, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, still the Indian GDP will be much larger. So we've got to work with India and also with the other two South Asian countries. What are the services we can provide them? Then you will find from Ahmedabad and Mumbai will all become one big urban center. So our idea was to work on the hub concept of get the harbors going, work with the Indians, get at the Indian harbors, others, then build on tourism. So this will be another hub. Now that the hub concept is out and East Terminal is out, how are you going to deal with it? And to begin with, you must go and deal with the Reserve Bank of India, addition to IMF and the EU, you deal with the Reserve Bank of India. I did have some preliminary discussions. We've talked to Chinese, but if this is the market, this is where you have to go. And more than that, sorry, I'm taking a bit more time. The fact is, no one will come here unless the economy is stabilized. And we haven't the commercial infrastructure. for offshore services. We haven't we have to stabilize the economy. That's what we achieved in 2018, 2019. Now it's gone to about over 200. And you can just ask Iran how much more we have to do on liberalization that two or three different ministries were working on. So without this, how are you going to make a success? Now, this is the question for which we have to get an answer. And
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you. Only thing is we need to also appreciate that this is we are going through a COVID, and I mean this is an unprecedented pandemic. And I think all nations are struggling big time. I think can we get Sanjay to respond to that? If you can talk a little bit about the USP.
Dinesh, I might also like to respond because I may have to leave. If you can, then after.
No, maybe go, Minister. Go ahead first, and I'll jump in.
Okay, sure.
Thank you, Dinesh. Thank you, Sanjay. I think at my initial presentation, I spoke about the competition. I did mention that we would have to compete with Dubai. I'm afraid I may not be in total agreement with Honorable Ranil Wickremesinghe on that. We need to compete. If you're having a island of this nature position, we got to compete with Dubai. We got to compete with Singapore. We cannot say that we cannot compete with Dubai. We got to take up the challenge. That's what we have to do. So I'm afraid that's something that we'll have to really focus on. And we are aiming for that. We are aiming for $12 billion of new GDP to come into the country. So that's a very clear goal. We are aiming at 100,000 jobs. We are aiming at least another 83,000 jobs of skilled people. We are aiming for a new benchmark of service in country. We are aiming at the overall infrastructure being at a very high level in that Colombo Port City. These are very clear aims, and I spoke about this. So maybe that can be picked up to understand. These are the aims. We are expecting FDI also 15 billion. That's not easy, but we got to work on that. So that's why I think it's important to recognize that. Then I myself have a little bit of experience with the Reserve Bank of India. I had discussions with them. As you know, Dinesh, I was also the governor of the central bank for 9 years.
Yeah.
So we had some very clear understanding with them. And since Mr. Wickremesinghe touched on the rupee, I must mention that the real rupee was really stable during 2013, 2014, that year. Thereafter, the rupee underwent fairly strong depreciation, right up to 185. But it's a challenge now with COVID and with all these other difficulties. But we are keen to establish the rupee also at a reasonable level soon, and that will also happen. So stabilizing the economy is an important part. And one of the ingredients of stabilizing the economy in the medium term would be the port city, which will attract investment. So that's why we got to work on that. And if we do that well, I think the economy also will be stabilized, and have the political stability now with the 2/3 majority. I'm sure we should be able to give the proper message to the outside world that they will be able to have consistent policies over a period of time. So Dinesh, I want to thank you as well as all the other organizers for giving me this opportunity. I'm afraid I'll have to leave now, but I wish all success to all the speakers, and I'm sure that there will be some wonderful interactions, and I look forward to going through it subsequently to understand these concepts, because as I mentioned in my initial remarks, we are very keen that it is a bipartisan effort that we take into consideration all the views of all stakeholders. There's plenty to offer, and we would fine-tune this this effort to be truly nationalistic and to make it to go forward with the consent of all the people. So, turning point of view, and thank you very much for it.
Yeah. So, Minister, we'll share the insights with you once it's over. We'll put together a report and maybe present it to you, which might be useful for you.
I look forward to receiving that.
So maybe Sanjay, now you can respond in terms of how do we create that USP to attract investment, and how do we compete with Dubai and Singapore and Malaysia?
Thanks, Dinesh. Thanks for everyone for this opportunity. I think if you take a step back, and I think Honorable former Prime Minister also raised some valid questions, because at the end of the day, there's no port city story without Sri Lanka, or there's no Sri Lanka story without port city to make another competitive story. So there's going to be a symbiotic relationship. So where are we starting? Let's just take a stop. We are around $4,000 per capita, and we've been stagnant around it for the last couple of years. Of course, there was COVID for 2 years. Let's take that out. But these are the formative years of a country. If you look at any other country that's gone through that $4,000 to $6,000 per capita, because the policies and orientation of a country is absolutely critical, and only then you will see rapid growth of the country. Right? So Indonesia went through this in the time, Singapore went through this. Take Taiwan back in the day around 1989, 1990, when they were around the similar kind of GDP. So the policy orientation is absolutely a must. So I do fully agree and subscribe to stabilizing the country, where we as a contributing is also a critical component of this discussion. Then the second part of it is again, how do we become relevant, right? So one is that the country story needs to get right, and then what is happening around. And I think talked about very clearly how the GDP is going to double in this country, whether it is India, whether it is the East African countries, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and here comes Sri Lanka, a country that could trade with all these countries without hindrance. Right? So firstly, we need to be able to attract or figure out where we're going. First, we need to create a level playing field to say, look, we can offer similar things that a Dubai could offer, a Singapore could offer, at least for corporate market. Now, in terms of the city's infrastructure point of view, we have long way to go. Right? So, livability point of view, if you take Sri Lanka, still will be ranked number one in this part of the world. So, in my discussions with, we talked about the financial sector. Let's take one sector. In my discussions with many of the financial sector individuals, whether it's Dubai or whether it's in Hong Kong, whether it's in Japan, these markets are also going through a global transformation. Right? Some of the markets are slowing down. They want to move their asset structures, get exposure to developing markets. They want to be closer. They're saying, well, we already have a foot in Singapore. We have a little bit of presence in Dubai. We'd rather be in Sri Lanka because the connectivity to India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and perhaps even the East Africa. So their point was like, look, if you have the legal structure, if you have the offering similar to, you would rather be here than an onshore financial district there would be in India. So what we need to do is fully subscribe, clearly articulate what do we go on, right? So say financial sector is absolutely critical. The second part of it is think about it. We are going through a huge transformation in terms of data, how we consume media, technology, so on and so forth. But it's been an area where a lot of these issues have been happening because of whether it's censorship, whether it's countries putting their own laws and regulations, things like that. All the CBD cables, every connectivity goes just like a shipping lane, just under Sri Lanka. We can be the tech hub. So again, a service-oriented, taking advantage of the laws that we put into this location like Port City, and creating that environment around, right? Open communication or open data hosting location, right? What to some extent what Hong Kong was, right? When there was the two countries. So there are a lot of opportunities, and we do have to compete for some of these businesses directly head on. Why is getting expensive for certain businesses or certain, how do I say, certain segments of the business vertical, and they would like to take it over. And if you otherwise, I think take an example of Dublin. It's an island, it's almost nowhere. But there are many companies that set up because they were providing something that is really required in the industry and in a way that is competitive and compelling. Now that articulation we need to do. So whether it is the commission or whether it is what is done, that strategic articulation, what ports it offers, to which sectors and how do we offer and who do we go after, and that is also an evolving thing, right? It's not that everything in Dubai just came and gone. There were certain key wins that we have. Then when you think about what are the supporting infrastructure, supporting companies and infrastructure and enablements we need to do, and then this will evolve. And also, so will be the law, and so will be the offering, and so will be what it stands for. Will also evolve. And similarly, on the land side, Sri Lanka has to, because without the proper story of to back that up, it's just another piece of land, and it could be anywhere. So if board goes in and articulates happens.
Yeah. But you want me to repeat the question or? Hello? Can you hear us?
Yes.
Jan, no, what I said was you have been a true friend of Sri Lanka. You have been in Sri Lanka for 10 years now. And
Yes.
there was a lot of concern about how do we sell this port city to the outside world. I'm sure you have a plan in place. So we'd like to know what the ingredients in that plan is.
No, for Port City project, we have been actually the PPP model. We invest $1.4 billion to get consideration to get 118 hectares of land as a return of our investment. So the whole port city is administered under the Sri Lanka government. So as we mentioned before, to get our investment return back, we need to surrender our leasehold right to any third party who is willing to invest in Port City, whether from Middle East, from India, or any other country who is willing to invest. So I don't know if address your concern or not.
Okay. So maybe Tulki, you can add to that.
Also add to that, Dinesh, if I may.
Just give us an update of the project as well. Quick update of the project also.
Yeah, so, okay. Update of the project is, in fact, we've completed the reclamation of 269 hectares of land in January 2019. It took us about just over 2 years. Actually, the missing piece, the delay had been the laws, business-friendly laws and regulations which we require in order to position Colombo as an attractive destination for primary investors and for secondary investors, obviously the businesses, right? Thus far, we have invested of the committed 1.4 billion, we have invested $1.1 billion. This is a foreign direct investment. This is a foreign direct investment, not a loan by the Chinese government or anything else. So the commercial risk of success is entirely on the project company at the moment. In terms of the infrastructure development within Port City, it is going according to schedule. Most of the infrastructure, including the utilities, the landscaping, the road network, all should be completed before mid next year. And some of the public spaces like the parks and the beach would be open for public before end of this year. So that's a quick progress update. Let me also try and add how do we really position Port City and what is really our game plan in Mr. Vikramasinghe's terms. We need to really understand that there is competition. There is competition by much developed countries like Singapore, Hong Kong, and Dubai. And also there is competition by developing countries like India, Indonesia. Now, if you take India, for example, they have set aside close to 10% of their GDP, about $25 billion, in fact, for reforms. They are reforming their labor laws, liquidity laws, and land laws. Because what we need to realize is post-COVID, I think as one of the panelists said, FDI is actually last year went down by 40%. So there is significant amount of competition to attract capital and talent, right? But what we have at the moment in Sri Lanka, we have massive cost advantages, right? We are about close to 80% cheaper compared to Singapore and Hong Kong in terms of the real estate, in terms of the manpower, in terms of the setup cost. So what we can really be is an alternative destination for countries like Singapore, Hong Kong, and Dubai. And also, if you look at Sri Lanka, if you take Sri Lanka in the SAARC region, we are an unaligned country. Now, at the moment, Indian banks are lending to Pakistan via Singapore and Hong Kong, which is a costly alternate. Now, once Port City is set up and once we have offshore banking unit going, Indian banks can route it via Sri Lankan offshore banking unit to lend to Pakistan. So we feel there is significant opportunity there as well. And as I said, Dinesh, the missing piece had been the law. And based on the soft market testing we have done within the region, to be honest, we are not on the investment radar, right? We need to get in there, and we feel we are confident with the infrastructure, the hardware provided by the private sector, world class, and with this law being enacted, we really can go out there and sell the Sri Lankan and the port city store.
Thank you. Before I turn to Iran and Riaz again, Mr. Vikramasinghe, a lot of talk, a lot of people have been talking about the need to attract Indians into Sri Lanka to invest in the port city. As I'm sure you are aware, the third large contingent of USD billionaires are in India. How do we get some of these guys to come and invest in port city?
No, firstly, we must show that we have a stable economy. At the moment, Indian one is more stable than ours. But we can stabilize it. It takes 3, 4, 5 years, and you must go ahead with it. Secondly, at the moment, India is doing some reforms which we should have done. So we must get on to it. Like in some areas, they are now passing a lot of new laws. So if we don't take if we don't leapfrog over it, we certainly will be behind it. Then thirdly, we have a lot of advantages. One mentioned is the India-Pakistan dealings, but I go on the basis after about 10 years, there will be direct trade between India and Pakistan. You can't go on forever. So at some stage, you have to de-escalate. But there are other areas. Now take, for instance, insurance, virtually untapped market from Indonesia to South Africa. And as India and Pakistan develops bigger. So there are many areas. The whole area of trust law, which is well known in Sri Lanka more than the other countries. So we have to find our niche markets and get in there. Then there will be new, there will be sort of completely new areas. In fact, our idea, if you don't mind me taking a minute, is to have specific laws for offshore business activities within the CIFC. Rest of the port city will function under the normal laws of Sri Lanka, but that the laws have to be futuristic, taking into account the future of financial services, blockchain technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics. So like that, we are identifying many other areas. Then the green economy, for instance, renewable energy. So we have to find that. But the basis is that we have to work with India. And what we've taken away is the whole hub concept, which we agreed that we'll first start with the ports. Ports mean shipping, insurance, logistics, insurance. Again, then with that, make Sri Lanka a tourist hub. We spoke to China, and China was coming in with the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. We could have done certain work on the Chinese side, but for the Chinese or Indians or Japanese or anyone to come, we had to first get our economy into order. We had to liberalize further, and we have to get the commercial and the infrastructure in place. Now, these are the issues because some of these were opposed by those in the government. So are you going to make the changes or not? So unless you decide on this, I don't think you can put the financial city in front and then stabilize the economy. You have to stabilize the economy first. And that's the donkey. The cart is actually the financial city. So unless you work it out, then the Indians will come gradually. But it's a geopolitical issue. At the end of the day, we have to talk to many Indian agencies, including more flights. But same, are we going to have direct flights from Pakistan here? Are we going to have direct flights from basically Bangladesh here? So those are geopolitical issues which first have to be discussed at the level of prime ministers. And those have to be cleared in a long-term understanding. Now, if you go back on those understandings, then it's difficult. Now, if we can't get into the Indian market, others are not going to come to Sri Lanka either. I wouldn't go to actually compete. I said we can't compete as such for the simple reason. Look at UAE has 106 billion in reserves and a per capita income of 46,000. Singapore has about 350 billion in reserve and a per capita income of 56,000. Hong Kong has 400 billion, per capita income of 46,000. So these are things that you will look at it. Any of you as businessmen will look. We have a future, but you must realize it's not something that's going to come in 5 years, not even in 10 years. You have to build it. And as you go along, you can develop it because this area has the potential. And are we going ahead with the changes?
Yeah, thank you. Riaz, can you hear us? Riaz, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can.
I can't hear.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Riaz, you run one of the largest audit and consulting outfit in Sri Lanka. Plus, you are globally connected. What is your outlook on the port city? I'm sure you have done your research and.
Yeah, you know, Dinesh, I want to talk of one trend. You know, we had a trend in the past about outsourcing. Now outsourcing is gone out. The new concept is the concept of delivery centers. Now, delivery centers is not Sri Lankans providing services to other countries like the outsourcing. What they do is for other countries invest in a center in a particular location where they bring the best talent to that location and they provide services to all of those geographies. The advantage there is the synergistic effect of getting some top people together in one location. And I think we should exploit that trend because if you're going to get some of the best people together, livability is a great important factor. And Sri Lanka has that in several fold. If you ask a lot of my Indian friends or even in the Middle East, they love Sri Lanka. They love living in Sri Lanka. So I think if we combine this trend of delivery centers where foreign entities invest in setting up a delivery center, staffing it with some of the best talent, bringing them together to serve those particular regions, then I think to me, Port City provides an ideal location which will have the right laws. People can be paid in dollars, the tax incentives, and it's also providing the right environment in terms of schools, hospitals, restaurants. That is what excites me. And I think that if we have a proper game plan, we can attract a lot of the top delivery centers for some of the big entities to Sri Lanka, to Port City. That's one of the points I wanted to make.
Dinesh. Dinesh.
Unmute.
Riaz, also there was a concern that the audit of the commission will be done by a third party instead of the Auditor General. I know it's the private firms may be happy with that, but then in terms of governance, is that the best way forward, or should we have a hybrid system?
No, but you see, even now, for a lot of government institutions are audited by the Auditor General, but he outsources and uses the services of private firms to help him. Ultimately, he signs opinion. We provide all the work. So I think even here, if the AG is the auditor, he will most probably use firms like ours and others to help him in expressing that opinion. Ultimately, the opinion will be his. So to that extent, I don't think this is any different to maybe audit of Bank of Ceylon or audit of the of some of the free zone or what are the big zones that we have had in the past.
Yeah, Riaz, in terms of expectations from the government and the port city, can you share with us some ideas? Maybe three ideas.
Just two things. 2 points I want to particularly see. One is I like the international arbitration. See, I have been in several arbitrations for clients where I've been called as an expert witness or to appear, provide evidence. We have converted the Sri Lankan arbitration process, which are supposed to be a quick win of how to resolve a dispute, into another court case outside the Halsdorf. So the arbitration process is as long and long drawn out as the court case. So I think I like this concept of the international arbitration process being set up in the port city, which will help people to resolve disputes quickly. And to me, that I think is very critical. The second point that I wanted to also make is that, from my experience, I was in Dubai as chief operating officer when DIFC was set up. And I also had a lot of interaction with the Qatar Financial Investment Authority when they were set, but that was the region I was looking after. You know, when they took people for the commission, they got the best people for the job. They got people who had experience running zones, people who had done, I read somewhere about, the importance of, putting people, ex officio people into the commission. Personally, I don't agree. I know oversight, if is required, can be exercised through other means, right? Just because I am secretary of this committee or secretary of that ministry, I may not be the best person to be on the commission. So my view is the second prerequisite, the commission must have people who know what business needs and make sure that the right people are put into that commission. To me, these are two important prerequisites. And there are many more, but I won't talk now interest of time.
Okay. Eran, just a quick question before I ask Nissa to maybe ask a few questions from the panel. There is a lot of talk of skills, and in order to guide this financial center, obviously we'll need to attract the best talent in the region. Given our archaic labor laws, do you think we can attract the right skills into that space?
Dinesh, before I answer that, I want to make a point which you will obviously in your report convey to the minister a bit better made in the minister around. That is, there are micro issues and macro issues, and we are discussing a lot of the micro issues now, right? And I'm generally a lot more positive on the micro issues, that a lot of these things that are being mentioned, without getting into all the details, that we could actually put it in place. My concerns are, similar to the former Prime Minister, my concerns are more to do with the macro issues, right? So, like for example, this bill, we are for the port city, but we are against the bill, you see? And the reason is it's brought into Parliament before a holiday. 1 day was given for us to go before the courts to basically canvass it. Sri Lanka doesn't have a post-enactment judicial review like other countries. So we have to get it right at the beginning. Now, next week on Tuesday, the verdict of the courts will be read on Tuesday. And if the government intends, after a 1 day's discussion on Wednesday, to pass a law, I can tell you right from the beginning, it's going to be flawed. Because these are such important laws that we need to build a consensus. And I think that needs to be absolutely conveyed, because we are for the port city, but we want to make sure, right, that lots of these concerns of different people have, that they are actually addressed. We have two advantages in this country. One is our physical location, and the other is an advantage, some see it as a disadvantage. We have a small population, but a literate population, a population which we basically need to keep educating and providing all the opportunities. So the hub concept and the service concept went together actually when you thought about it strategically, right? So the location gave you the hub, and then the service concept gave you financial services, information services, technology, insurance, you name it, building around it. I'm to some extent happy that I participated in this, because at least it doesn't appear that we are going the tax haven zone, right, that kind of road, but going a more kind of a good, legitimate, really building, but a long-term, 30, 40-year business, right, rather than think of it as a 5-year-old business. Now, I would be concerned about some of the quick things that were raised, like, the delivery center, I think is a good idea, right? And in fact, when we were going through this, I remember meeting with members of the royal family from England, having dinner with them, with Dr. Harsha De Silva, and we were working out details like having the international school in the port city. I think Sri Lankans, we are very good at the micro, and I'm sure we can fix it. Doesn't matter which government is there. But fixing the macro is more complicated. And I think that's what we should focus on. Is issue about for internationals coming here and working here, attracting the skills we need, upgrading our skills. I think all that can work and all that is permissible, because we will create a good environment, as we are, Mihula said here. I'm confident about that. But I think the macro is more important, because what we are facing now is a migration of the middle class young professional out of the country, not into the country, out of the country. So that is why I'm emphasizing, right, that we have to get that sorted out. We have to get the macroeconomy sorted out, and we need to get the law properly discussed, right, and all the stakeholders involved and put in place, because then we will have support from all quarters, because this is a 30-40 year project, and Sri Lanka needs this project, and we need to get this project right.
Okay, thank you, Iran. Nishtam, maybe.
Yeah, no, just a response to Mr. Vikramasinghe's comment that about he mentioned about ECT not being there, but with Adani coming on board for the Western terminal, is Mr. Vikramasinghe still maintaining that stance, or you think that has been negated to some extent?
No announcement about anyone coming for West Terminal, and no one will come. The fact is, East Terminal was an agreement with the Indian government, Japanese government. Whether they want to put Adani's or Reliance or anyone else is not our business. As long as we are satisfied, they could do the job. But that was an agreement with the Indian government, and that was broken. Just as much as Port City, we finally had agreement. We had discussion there with the Chinese government, and we had agreement of what we are going to do, and that we'll bring the financial city here. So you've broken that. But more than that is, without that, you can't get access to the Indian harbors. After all, what are we doing? We are not functioning because of our demand is transshipment. And if Indian economy goes up by fourfold, just imagine what is required. Even these harbors, ports that Mr. Modi is developing won't be enough. Same with Bangladesh. Same with Pakistan. Pakistan can be more, and Iran, if they're going to drive into Central Asia. So once you become a logistics center and a shipping center, the rest follows. It's much easier to sell your financial center as we start. And we were going to have a North Port. The North Port would have had some warehouses. We would have had a separate system there, and bonded warehouses would have been there. Then Trincomalee, with having all those ports functioning, Hambantota going down to dealing with a different clientele. This is where they. So once you broke that, then you have lost that. You have left that game. Then secondly, I'm asking, if we have broken that, then how are we going to start talking with the Reserve Bank of India? That's the major issue. It's a long-term one, but we have to look at, okay, if you're not looking at India, then you are written India off. Then where are you looking at? You can't look at Southeast Asia, because Singapore is there, and Hong Kong is there. You can't look at the Middle East. But you have to decide by 2050, from Saudi Arabia to Indonesia will be the growth areas. Everyone is trying to come in here. So catch what is available and develop that. That's all that I can say. But this is a breach, because if you had done this, you could have become a center for tourism, a financial center. So that how we are going to discuss that with India is a matter for the government and for India, not for me. But I say you have to rethink of it now.
Okay, thank you. Dinesh, I'd like to bring Mr. Sarath.
Yeah, he has a lot to say about the laws. So maybe we should bring him in.
Yeah, Sarath, in terms of just a quick response to the stuff that already been listed as some of the concerns.
Unmute.
Sarath, you need to unmute your microphone.
Yeah.
Is it okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Can I start talking?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Nishta and Dinesh. Now, let me broadly make a broad statement on the legal regime in Sri Lanka, especially the port city. You see, the port city, the legal regime is excellent in the sense now there is the legal system, Sri Lankan legal system intact. On top of that, the commission, you see, which is unique, which is not happening, which is not the case in Dubai or in Singapore or in any other country, because we have learned from them. And then we swam, they swam in the dark. We are swimming in the daylight. So therefore now that is why we have got an excellent opportunity, excellent legal system. Now, for example, take for example, the International Commercial Arbitration Center. You know, we were so unfortunate we had one. It was only a week ago, only a week. We go to Singapore for that. Now there is inbuilt system here, of course, that has to be looked into carefully. It's not perfect. It has to be corrected, I think, one day. And this is one of the best that we can have. And also the legal system. So what I say is that now the inbuilt legal system here, without those, in the absence of many acts, will be ideal for investors. So that is about the legal structure and the legal regime connected to the port city. Any other clarifications I'm prepared to answer, but this is my general statement. Any questions on that?
Yeah, maybe Mr. Vikramasinghe can comment on that, on the laws.
Legal system is what are the laws we have for the offshore? So that's a matter that has to be decided. Our legal system here, mix of Roman Dutch law, English, as he said, Sarat said is good. But when you go to offshore, you have to decide on the laws. You can't have regulations for that. Now, are we going to have our own company law for the offshore companies? Or are we going to take the English law? Those are issues that will have to be sort of what's our offshore law on shipping, on insurance, all those issues. We'll now sit down and start drafting laws.
Honorable Minister, I think it's intact here. It's intact here in the Act. Point 1, point 2 is that we can learn a lot from Latin America. Or from other.
Yeah, we have no laws on offshore. The Act, someone has to make it. The government has to make it. Act is a framework, one with regulations. People don't come with regulations.
Okay.
Maybe the union can offer some advice.
Oh, thanks, Dinesh. I mean, one thing that I really wanted to highlight was some of the key principles that have been talked about on infrastructure best practice in the G20 and OECD that are relevant here. And a couple points really stand out for me, which is one, what we've been talking about in depth here, the real need to have a coherent, predictable, stable, efficient regulatory environment for the macro economy, but also the importance of having a long-term strategic vision for the project that is grounded not just in a government's vision for the project itself, but also incorporating sort of economic, social interests as well, and critically building a broad social and political consensus. And that's why I think webinars like this, discussions like this are absolutely critical. And I congratulate on behalf of our Secretary General, ICC Sri Lanka, for putting this on. The other point that I think is relevant here is that ultimately, for foreign investors, any project like this really just has to have a very clear sort of return on investment, and needs to show commercial value for them. And at some points, I think we need to always focus on how to make it as attractive as possible. And events like this indeed could well be done with the international community as well, which could be really helpful. So hopefully that's somewhat useful.
Thank you. Sanjay, can you hear us? Sanjay, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
This, I think it might be good for you to turn off your video because you are breaking up. And respond to my next question is how does the BOI fit into all this in terms of promoting Port City and attracting the FDI into the country?
Dinesh, as I initially said, like, look, it has to be a symbiotic relationship. in both sides, right? So there's no port city without Sri Lanka, and I think that's very well articulated, and everyone spoke about it, right? So when we try to market Sri Lanka, so we need to also, market port city, we need to get the Sri Lanka story right. And the second part of it is that even assume that we get our strategy right and we attract whatever the businesses. And look, I do agree, it's a long-term journey. The next 5, 6, 7 years, if we attract all the right businesses and people decide to come and put their regional headquarters to serve India, all the sectors that we talked about around and the Prime Minister. There's a lot of spillover effect to the Sri Lanka, right? So if it's a service industry, it's great, but if they want to do any sort of manufacturing, that has to be on the Sri Lankan side. So unless we have a similar service offering, the relevance of the BOI also needs to be maintained and brought up. Secondly, people who come in may decide to live in Port City, may decide to live outside of Port City. So the infrastructure, the community, the restaurants, the livelihood, the livability, all that has to be provided, right? And they cannot Dubai, right? You go in for a business meeting, but you spend the weekend and you travel around and maybe do a little bit of a sightseeing and all that and come around. So tourist attractions have to come in. Airports, our road network has to be developed, infrastructure is involved, whether it's rail or light rail or utility involved, right? So there's quite a bit of parallel development that needs to happen on the countryside to make that just microcosm much more attractive, right? And we only have one school here and one hospital. But all of the talent is going to be developed in Sri Lanka. So unless you do the education reform, right? Unless you do things that will enable and unlock whoever who comes here, this will fail. So in terms of the direction point of view, in terms of being a policy input point of view, so BO has to look at it in a symbiotic way and sometimes ahead of plan. Right? Develop the talent pool, develop what you need to make sure that the port city's long-term viability is maintained. So that I would say the work we have to do versus what we're doing today in terms of managing all the manufacturing point of view, it's actually a new muscle that BOI needs to grow. And it's a new set of skills, a new set of activities we need to undertake to be able to deliver for the country, right? Our Sri Lanka vision, which includes port city.
Okay, thank you. Tulki, can you hear us? Tulki, can you hear us? Okay. Ashana, can I move on to you, Ashana?
Sure, I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah. Ashana, there's a lot of talk about the role of banks in this, in the new port city. In terms of expectations, how should banks gear up to meet the new normal in the port city?
So I think, as I was saying, in this region, there is a lot happening in terms of, as the World Bank says, it will be the next export powerhouse. So for trade financing, I think banks will be very interested. For investment banking, banks will be very interested to come in. But, we need to know what the, as Honorable Vikramaratne said, what are the micro incentive plans are. And I think even not only local banks, many other banks in the region and outside would like to come in. For example, if you take DIFC, you must understand that most of the people are not in DIFC because of the UAE, but because they want to be in that region. So us being in, SAARC region, we are part of SAARC, we are part of BIMSTEC. I think, we can lead as a hub for trade finance from a banking perspective. And, in marketing this, we can use SAARC, BIMSTEC, and also not to forget that we are members of Commonwealth. And we should be, when, as Honorable Minister Ajit Kumar Cabral said, when they are doing the road shows, they should also do London, because, we, as the Commonwealth, I think we'll get a lot of support from that. And the banking industry certainly can play a role if the stage is set.
Thank you. Iran, you talked about some of the macro issues. What is really worrying you?
Yeah, so I would say if you take out the economy generally, we'll have to have a consistency of policy. It's very difficult to answer that question in a short way, but if we use the old terminology, right, are we going to be open, globally integrated, economy, and when it comes with its trade, not being very selective, we'll honor all our international treaties, including the WTO. Presently there are lots of discussions on that. Then also some of the other factors that have gone into recently, right? Sri Lanka is being widely talked about, right, as a result of the resolutions in the UNHRC. These are things that we need to avoid, basically. So if we have an economic focus, some of these things, even diplomatically, we will handle it differently, so that avoiding some of the barriers that are actually coming up in some of these capitals at the moment. So that's why I said the macro issue is more our issue. I have all the confidence that we will be able to handle the physical infrastructure, reclamation stage to the construction stage. I have no issue. I think we can handle all those details, right? But the economic policy and political stability, right, is going to be very important, internal political stability. Because if we are not going the tax haven route, which generally, whether you have looked at Macau or Panama or Cayman Islands or whatever, they've all had their different consequences. We are not going that route, clearly. So we have been talking about Singapore and Dubai and a different route here. Therefore, domestic policies are absolutely important, that they are in sync with what we are going to do in the port city.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Vikram Singh, you had expressed some concerns about gaming laws and all. Can we know what your concern was?
No, none of those countries has the monetary authority or the Financial Service Commission dealt with gaming. Gaming is done by a separate organization. There is basically a casino regulatory authority or a gaming authority. When you bring this together, then it means that you can have money laundering. I'll give you a good example. 2013, they were to have Crown Resorts coming in here, Crown Casino. Now what has happened? There have been court cases. Now there are 3 inquiries. One has been tabled already. 2 more, where they said Crown Casino was involved in money laundering and with various gangs. So why are we taking this upon ourselves? If you look at the gambling scene, there are 3 casinos in basically Malaysia, Singapore. The Macau has about 40. Who's going to come here? With India having had 2 states, Nepal 1 state, and Nepal and Sri Lanka, we haven't seen such a big increase in the Indian gambling on casinos. They gamble on Premier League and others. So by bringing this in, what you are doing is you are opening the road for money laundering. Or the Standy Ho, all of them have really been found that they have been involved in various illegal activity. China is cracking down on its cross-border gambling. They've found about 35 billion. They have now got as fines. So are we prepared to go? If you want to have some casinos, there are 2 casino operators here, tell them to come in, and at least you can keep control of them. They are not going to get into money laundering or the activity. So even junkets are getting hammered. Even in Australia, they are going to hammer the junkets. So then who's going to bring the people down?
Okay, I'm sure Asian and Iran will both agree with me on I think the central bank does a very good job with the FIU. Iran, you are State Minister of Finance. Maybe you like to comment.
Yes. The only comment I would have on regulation is for a port city or a special zone to develop its own regulatory environment, it takes time. So when we envisaged this during the term of office that we were in office, we specifically said that the present regulatory environment will prevail you see, because it takes time. These are 30, 40-year projects. You can develop parallel things, but it takes time. And I think if that is very clearly set out, it will give a lot more confidence.
Okay, Ishana?
Yes, I agree, but I'm made to understand that the same laws will prevail. And I agree on that.
Yeah, yeah. Sanjay, there are a lot of questions here, mainly about how do we really attract this investment into Sri Lanka in terms of what is our value proposition. I think Mr. Vikramasinghe also referred to that earlier. Maybe if you can tell us in terms of how we are positioning Sri Lanka, given that we are looking at attracting about $40 billion by 2025.
Yeah, I think that's still an.
I think if you turn off your video, I think your voice will come out clearly.
Right. I think Dinesh,
that's good. Yeah.
Tulsi and the team is actually working on it in terms of getting the whole city value proposition done. At the end of the day, the Sri Lanka point of view, if you look at a country, as I rightly said, in a formative years around $4,000 per capita, you need to get the policy consistency and the policies right. And I agree with her. And I think that is one of the most fundamental things for any investor who comes in for a longer period of time. Investing in a country to get to reap the benefits, they need to make sure that the policy consistency is there. The second part of it is what are the cross industries that what a country should need or country should have to build and propel the economy, right? And I think that is the primary focus needs to go in, right? Meaning, yes, we have to transition into services. It's not just blindly going around on ICT or a service orientation. Which aspects of ICT or which aspects of services industry, if I may say, do we need to go and orchestrate as a government or a policymaker in terms of the right policy framework, the right incentives, and the right enablers, which is education and so on, all the other aspects that need to come in. So those need to come in to get the country position. So how are we going to position? Firstly, they need to get the policy consistency. Secondly, need to get the ease of doing business. Then you have these cross sectors we need, whether it is tourism, whether it is the services, yeah, whether it is the value added manufacturing, no longer just doing our trade rubber, but going into the high value added manufacturing, whether it is mineral based, graphene based, polysilicon based, right? How do we protect our inherent or advantages when it comes to apparel, how do we go to wearables, fabric and so on and so forth, right? And then take advantage of our inherent positives, a livable city, a good medical system, good education system, where people can be a melting pot. So all that has to be the social fabric part of this economy. So we are oriented to position, right, as a place you want to invest, you want to reap the benefits, and also you want to live. So there are many steps need to be taken. Many steps need to, I would say, well, few steps have been taken, or many steps have been taken. Still a long way to go, right? So then only Sri Lanka becomes an attractive investment destination. We are no longer the only girl on the beach, if I may use that kind of thing. So we really need to stay relevant. Stay relevant not just today, but think ahead for 5 to 10 years out, and then start building it. Now, good case in point would be if you look at pharmaceuticals. We could have built this like 20, 30 years ago, but unfortunately, somehow we didn't. We need to think about what is really emerging in terms of technology and really take a calculated risk and start building those clusters with, like economies one, like credential-based technologies of another one, ICT, AI, insurance, some of the things I mentioned. So I agree with you. There's overlap in terms of thinking, which is good, because this will transcend not just one election cycle or which is something that the policy as a consistent thing that we need for this country over a decade, 10, 15, 20 years. That's only when a country really grows. I think that's what we buy.
Thank you.
And so in Singapore.
Thank you, Sanjay. There's a question here for Riaz and Mr. Vikramasinghe. Somebody wants to know what should be the composition of the port commission.
You want me to go first, or
Yeah,
no?
yeah.
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 As I mentioned, going by the experience of DIFC.
Say for example, you're hiring the people. What are the skills and competencies you look for? And I made it easier for you.
Yeah. I will look for people who have done it before. See, just because I have a PhD or a chartered accountancy or any other qualification doesn't automatically qualify me. As somebody said, there are lots of people who have done it before, and we are now swimming in the light, not in the dark. So we can learn from that. So I would go for people who have done it, people who have done BDIFC, KIA, then the Labuan, the lot of others. People who have done it and been there, done it, experienced, and people who understand business, who understand what investors want, and who know how to set the thing up to do that. That's why I said I'm not in favor of ex officio positions. I think we must get the best possible people for the job into the commission. The other oversight can be done through other means. I know there are issues about oversight, but that I'm talking from purely a business point of view. I would go for people who have done it, who have experience, and who understand trade, rather than official ex officio people into those commissions.
Thank you, Mr. Vikramasinghe.
Well, we looked at it when we were in a government, and the best was to get people like the governor of the bank and all into it. After all, the governor, ST and others should also reflect the government policy. I don't agree that these are people who don't know. I mean, in the times I have been there, they lifted the economy up, which the private sector has not been able to do. And actually, they are the people who sort of did the spade work on it. You need them. But have private sector people. But they must be Sri Lankans. Look, we are trying to go our own way. So why don't we then have an advisory body of people we need? But who do we need? Do we need the person who set up something in Dubai or UK? Or do you need a man who will advise you how to get into the Indian market or the Pakistani market? You've got to decide where you're going, what you're going to do. So I have a different view on it. But all this depends again back on the game plan. So this should be a private sector people. Look at the GCC. Today, Katunayaka and Biagama are the best zones in South Asia. All done by Sri Lankans too. We looked at other places. We are capable of putting it together. But if you make up your mind, the decisions have to be made here. And a lot of the decisions have nothing to do with the commission. Put the economy into order. That is the first thing. If you don't put the economy into order, no one will be coming in. Then do all the build up all the commercial infrastructure, do all the other reforms you have to do. Then only that these people can really prepare the way. But initially, it's a question of studying and the fact that we have to answer. The other one is there's one difference here, I must say. Certainly, the Auditor General can nominate companies to do the audit. But in this instance, it's not the Auditor General. It's the Minister. Even if it's international ones, it doesn't matter. Let the Auditor General name someone. So this is where the breach has come in.
Thank you. Iran, anything?
Yeah, I agree that there have to be checks and balances. I can hear what Riaz is saying, that knowledgeable people need to be there, honest, competent, efficient people. However, I do not put my trust in one individual, whoever the individual might be, right, making appointments. And we are in a situation now, we don't even have a constitutional council or anything like that. The checks and balances have been removed. Therefore, I would go with the idea that it's good to have some ex officio people in there and then have the other people appointed, because I think then you have a good balance in it, and the checks and balances are in place, and that will be more acceptable, and you are building systems. And also we know that when governments change, appointed people change, and then there's sometimes no continuity, you see. And for all the reasons considered, I would say we need a balance.
Thank you. Sarath, there is a question for you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear.
Yeah, somebody says that nobody is going to come and invest unless the law delays are addressed.
It has been looked into, loss delays. If you read the act very carefully, now, for example, now there are going to be day-to-day hearings. And also there is a provision here that it has to be given priority, priority. All that have been looked into carefully, especially in this. That is why I say this is a very unique system, unique one here. I have been the ambassador in UAE, and they are not, I mean, with all due respect, they are not that smart. They in 1960, it was a fish market. They got oil. And thereafter, what is the secret? Their secret is they got all the CEOs from all over the world and got them them to employ them. So that is, and they had money. That is one of the successes. So here also now, as I mentioned earlier, we are swimming in daylight now. They swam in the dark. So therefore, I think we are okay here. The system is intact. We have it taken care of. And I think we can really look forward look forward, I suppose, with the new legal regime and legal structure as well.
Thank you. Tulsi, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Tulsi? Yeah. Tulsi, there was a question around that there's so much of green finance available globally, and Sri Lanka has not been has been poor at attracting that money into Sri Lanka. In terms of setting the right infrastructure to attract that, what is Port City strategy?
Yeah, so on the green financing side, obviously compliance is key. So as starters, what we have done is the Port City project has gone through 3 types of EIAs. The first and the second EIAs were in relation to the reclamation works. After the second EIA, we had over 200 written submissions. There was a committee appointed to address them. And the license that was issued to us had 72 conditions. And there is an agency obviously monitoring compliance, and we have what is called an environmental management plan. And the third EIA was done for vertical development. Similar process was followed, and the license issued to us has about 52 conditions, and those are adhered to. In addition to that, what we do is we have what is called investment or development guidelines. So each investor who wants to develop in Port City has to adhere to this best-in-class international guidelines, which has 4 volumes. 1 is on urban development, 2 on landscaping, 3 on utilities. Most importantly, 4th is on sustainability. So we have given a significant focus on sustainability, and the sustainability chapter was prepared by Atkins out of UK. And there are even bonus extra GFA to be developed by potential investors if you adhere to minimum green standard certificates. So that is part and parcel of our development plan. And in fact, we were talking to some of the local banks here to try and see, look how well we position in terms of if any company wants to raise green bonds or green financing in terms of compliance. I think we are pretty much there. But once we go out to the market and try to raise, obviously we may need to adjust or adhere to some of the additional requirements that may be put in place.
One more question to you. I think even Riaz referred to this. Somebody says that there is a lot of potential for online warehouses, especially now. And Port City should be actually targeting some of these big companies. And he says that in Texas, some of these companies are moving to China and India, and that we should start talking to them.
Yeah, so what we plan to do, Dinesh, is obviously the missing piece for us to go and have some of these discussions with potential parties was the law. And what we have done is now we have appointed marketing. So see, our primary market is South Asia, and you cannot ignore India, right? So we have appointed marketing agents out of India, the Middle East, Singapore, and China as the initial phase. And we have planned also a series of virtual meetings, roadshows. Once the COVID situation is under control and borders are relaxed, we will have more physical marketing, more aggressively market and have some of those physical roadshows. In fact, we've initially planned our first overseas marketing roadshow to be rolled out at the World City Summit in Singapore. And I understand, I think 2 or 3 years ago, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe took part in that and gave the keynote speech, and Port City was mentioned. Obviously, we are 3 years down the line. So that is the plan, and we hope to attract some of these potential businesses and sectors to come and set up in Port City.
Okay, maybe Mr. Wickremesinghe, you can respond to this question. Somebody says we are talking too much about India, we are talking about China. China can make all these investments.
Why should Chinese come and make the investment? Because they have markets there and they are growing. And now they are going to allow more monies to go between Hong Kong and Shanghai. So let's be realistic. Chinese have also come here to get into the markets in the Indian Ocean. So where are you going? Certainly, Chinese can come and have the financial institutions here. But where are your customers? We can't go to Saudi Arabia. We can't go to Arabia. The simple reason that Arabia is certainly they have Dubai. Chinese are coming in, and for them, the important part is that Port City and the financial city we make is one that can enable the commercial side of the Belt and Road Initiative to operate. Because one part that we see is the infrastructure, but there is a road. So then who are the people who want that money? It's not Chinese. It's not Japanese. It basically has to be people around here. So Chinese are also coming here because they want to find a market. If they want to take it from China, they won't come here. Secondly, there are a lot of money going to infrastructure, mainly by Belt and Road, but also by the Japanese. The next step will be various businesses will come up in Africa with the ports, the economic zones. So someone must provide them also with capital. So that's another opportunity that comes around here. But everyone, the market they're looking at is India. The problem of India is, when is India going to join the RCEP? If they don't join the RCEP, they are certainly their economic development will be delayed. But if they come on to it, it's a different matter. But the market is there. If South Asia is the market, that's the market we do. And if South Asia is inhabited by Indians and not Englishmen nor Chinese, then we have to live with them. That's all that we
Thank you. This is a question maybe Tulsi and Asian and Riaz can respond. Somebody wants to know whether we could actually launch an infrastructure bond globally to fund this Port City project development from now on. Asian, you like to go first?
I think, given the present situation of COVID, etc., does come into play when floating a bond. So COVID has created some issues. So we need to be patient and, have a plan ready to market. And I'm sure in good times that it is a possibility.
Dinesh, you need to.
Dinesh, you are muted.
Sorry, Tulsi, can you also respond to that, because you'll have to do all the groundwork.
No, so if you're referring to the infrastructure words, as I said, majority is completed and completing with the investment purely of a private sector, with a fund $1.4 billion as a foreign direct investment. So that is really being done. Now what is required is for us to monetize these 178 hectares of marketable land, which government also has a portion. At today's cost, if government was able to monetize their portion of the land, that is about $2 billion. So, I mean, again, going back to the question now, that groundwork have been done. How does demand? How do you attract companies to relocate to Sri Lanka, set up their headquarters, use Port City as a platform to access the region, and also for Sri Lankan companies, Sri Lankan exporters who are now set up in Singapore and Hong Kong and elsewhere to really use port city to as a platform to do the exports, while the manufacturing can remain within rest of Sri Lanka.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with Tulsi. You know, where port city is concerned, the infrastructure is done. But I think I think somebody mentioned, it's not enough just a port city. You need to develop the infrastructure outside, because, you know, people who come to port city will also want to go out and, you know, go sightsee. So we need to get our infrastructure done, like our roadways and the rail, etc. So I think for that, we need to do an infrastructure fund. And I'm sure the Middle East particularly has a lot of money, particularly, you know, for them, as you know, they look for what they call clean investments, which have no interest in certain types of things. And infrastructure for them is very, very attractive. So I think there's a lot of scope for raising an infrastructure fund, but not for port city, but outside.
Damien, would you like to come in?
Sure, I'd like to just pick up on that last point actually about the availability for finance in ESG, especially because this market is just growing astronomically at the moment, and really since 2007, ESG stocks investments have actually outperformed other sort of normal investments. And you know, I think this is a trend that is worth thinking about as well in the design of these projects, because if you can capture some of that finance, it's incredibly helpful. Especially important, I think, really after this year, because there is this confluence of regulatory activity. Some of the really big financial institutions are starting to shift significant funds. And there's also going to be many more incentives from governments for investments in that sort of ESG manner. So I think that's an important trend worth thinking about as well.
Okay, Sanjay, would you like to come in?
Sorry, Dinesh, the question was?
I know about somebody was asking the question whether, in order to do the balanced development, whether we could float an infrastructure fund globally.
I think I think there are two parts of development, right? So one is that if you look at the composition of port city, there is the financial district. There are key assets in the international the island. So those the developers themselves will do, right? If you hospital, if you're in a school, if you're doing a convention center, those the developers will do themselves. And for that funding, yes, typically they could look at a REIT, they could look at monetization mechanisms and so on and so forth. Then there is a whole residential part of it.
Yeah.
So then again,
okay,
that would be a developed with the developers. But for certain utilities and certain buildings, that you could develop if we decide to, or if the port city commission decides to develop themselves. Yes, it is a mechanism to do it, but if that is not the only means of funding, it's a means of funding.
Thank you. Iran, there's a question for you, whether we can have a bipartisan approach, given the pandemic, to get this port city laws out of the way.
Yeah, so as I said, we are representatives, right? Representatives of stakeholders, citizens and stakeholders. And I wanted that actually conveyed very carefully, because the way you build a bipartisan approach is by actually discussion. So literally, we will only come to know what the Supreme Court has said on Tuesday in the morning. And on Wednesday, if they want to take a vote, we don't even have time to come to the chambers. We don't have time to go to the other stakeholders. We don't even have time to discuss with our lawyers and put forward proposals or amendments to the bill, you say, to have that discussion. So I think this is such an important, and this is a long-term project, you see, that it's important to build a consensus, right? That the law is the foundation of it, right? And to get that done properly. It's very unfortunate from what we've seen so far is that there has been like a rush to do this, right? I'm just saying we can do this. I'm not talking about a big delay. I'm just talking about weeks, not months, you see, that it could be actually discussed. Because if that does not happen, we may have a repetition of what happened earlier when there was no discussion earlier. And then the reclamation started, and the principle of whether land should be leased or sold freehold to foreigners was not actually discussed with the opposition, and subsequently had to be reversed when governments changed, and that put the project 1 year back. We must avoid a repetition of such things. So building consensus takes time, and therefore we are saying that we are for the port city. Our issue is on the contents of the bill, and I think it's best to actually discuss it in detail. And we are talking of, I said, not delaying it. We're talking of weeks, not even months, and then move forward.
Thank you. Mr. Vikramasinghe, there's a question to you whether we should set up a gaming authority.
Look, as far as we are concerned, there is a gaming law that has to be revised, and you need a new law. So you can either have a gaming authority or a regulatory authority. That I think is needed. Otherwise, we will have, it's not merely casinos, but others. So we have to modernize the law. The question is, if once you have that, whatever you want, get under that law. Don't take it under the BOI or under this commission.
Damien, there's a question to you about how do we attract all these ethical funds that are floating around in Europe?
Well, I think the main thing, as has already been discussed, is really about sort of regulatory compliance, embedding best practices in both all the E, the S, and the G elements of ESG. So environmental best practices, social best practices, governance best practices as well. I think we've sort of spoken at length, many people have here today about certainly the governance aspects. And that's absolutely critical. But so long as those sort of the governance of the project itself fits within those frameworks, then it would become very, very attractive. But the other aspect, of course, is not just compliance with those frameworks. It's about the potential returns on investment. And so key there, as others have mentioned, is really getting the macroeconomic settings right, making sure that there's a clear value proposition for investors, as well as fitting within those frameworks.
Thank you. Damien, also, maybe you can quickly share a few words or say something about the vaccine distribution. I know that you're involved in ICC managing this, so maybe it might be interesting to all the panelists.
Sure, this is a very different discussion, but a very important one. So I guess for everyone's information, the International Chamber of Commerce is the principal private sector liaison for COVAX, for the ACT Accelerator for the WHO. So we've been working very closely with those global public health bodies on vaccine distribution and trying to ensure global, equitable, rational distribution of vaccines. And clearly there are some major bottlenecks at the moment, delays in rollouts. And what we're extremely concerned about is the clearly inequitable distribution. Vaccines in high-income countries being delivered, but major delays. And so what we're really advocating for in all of our interactions with governments all around the world is for the lifting of trade barriers, especially export restrictions, not just on vaccines themselves, but on component parts, including vials and other aspects that can create bottlenecks in production. Secondly, what is really critical right now is simply ramping up production. And so in our view, that requires matchmaking much more between vaccine manufacturers in advanced economies and potential producers in the developing world, especially. We've identified at least 200 companies around the world that could be producing vaccines and therapeutics that are presently not, owing to the lack of cooperation between players in the private sector. And then thirdly, what we're really emphasizing is that there needs to be much greater collaboration between the public and private sectors here. It's absolutely critical. Unfortunately, it's been lacking. But at ICC, we're really advocating for both the WTO to step up and also to really try to create a more trusting relationship between pharmaceutical companies and governments, because without that long-term collaboration, you're not going to really get results. And then I guess very finally, there's also a huge financing shortfall. So for COVAX alone, there's still $19 billion that need to be put into that for it to achieve its goals this year, to vaccinate 20% of the world's population. It's just the money hasn't been coming. So we've been calling on governments to fully fund that initiative as quickly as possible. It's absolutely critical. But even beyond that, that's just a part of the problem. 20% gets us nowhere near global herd immunity, and there's no funding plan for how to encourage investments in vaccine production and distribution for the longer term. Clearly, this is not going away anytime soon, but hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavor for the
Thank you.
Where we're operating.
Thank you. I think we have gone beyond 6 as well. So my final question to the entire panel, it came from one of the participants. He raised the issue that nobody talked about the role of the private sector, and in terms of expectations, what is the panel's expectation of the private sector in all this? So can I start with Riaz?
Yeah, where the private sector is concerned, while all tax incentives and others are useful, the most important thing, and you ask any private investor, it is consistency of policy and consistency of interpretation of policy. I think if those two are the underlying things that all private sector investors look for when they come to invest. So I think as somebody who have a lot of interaction with investors who want to come in, the first question they always ask me is about consistency of policy and consistency of interpretation of policy. And of course, the taxes and incentives come after that. So I would say those are the first two critical. If we get that right, then I think investment will come.
Thank you. Yeshana?
Thank you, Dinesh. I do agree with Riaz. Consistency of policy is a must. And of course, the incentives also must be there. I believe already, if I'm not wrong, LOLC has invested in the port city. And I think likewise, the private sector will back it as we go along, and maybe after the laws have been finalized. For example, I'm sure a lot of the banks will want to join in and make those investments if there are advantages there. And I think from the port city management team, I'm sure lots of people are already from Sri Lankan private sector knocking on their doors, trying to find out and showing interest. And I'm sure they will back it. After all, they will be the ambassadors marketing port city. It would be the private sector.
Thank you. Tulsi?
Yes, I mean, Heshan is right, because see, the buy-in of the local private sector is key for us. Although the local demand is not sufficient to fill up port city, but the buy-in of the private sector, investment by local companies, joint ventures is a key that gives the confidence for the international investors, businesses to come and locate in port city. And again, the missing piece was the law, and there have been a lot of discussions we have had with local investors. Once the law is enacted, you will see some further investments made by local companies, conglomerates.
I'm hopeful for you, Tulsi, once the law is out. Sanjay, I'd like to come in?
Yeah, Dinesh, I think I fully agree with Reyes and what Eshan said, right? The policy consistency and policy interpretation is important. And one thing we should not forget is this is a piece of legislation that will evolve. So private sector has a crucial role to play in terms of sensing the future and also making sure that they are involved in the policy formulation process to bring about the right legal frameworks, the laws, because the general country laws will be, some of these will be applied here. So that we do this in advance to get the port city and Sri Lanka into the right level. So private sector involvement absolutely necessary.
Thank you. Sarath, you also head the Ambassadors Forum. Maybe what is your point of view? You're muted.
Sarath, you're muted.
Muted.
You need to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
You see, now I will just read this part of the preamble which says state to ensure by means of public and private economic activity. That is what they intended, and that is what has been taken place worldwide everywhere. For example, maybe in Dubai, or maybe in Israel, or maybe in Malaysia, it is the private sector that took the lead, and then that should be the position. So therefore, now I am of the view that more than the government, of course, government will give the infrastructure, but the private sector and the business community, and of course, I'm again saying that the international community includes the ambassadors who are well looked after worldwide, must take the lead to promote this with the private sector using economic diplomacy. Thank you.
So what we are saying is the ambassadors need to do much more than this.
Say again?
What you're saying is our ambassadors need to do much more than
they
this.
should be more proactive. They have to work harder.
Can't the Ambassadors Forum make a recommendation to the Foreign Ministry?
Certainly, yes. We will be making a recommendation, and we have been working hard with the Foreign Minister. But I hope there will be. I hope the ambassadors will be reactivated now.
If I may just add one thing, Dinesh.
Yeah.
In fact, the Foreign Ministry is already in touch with us, and they will line up series of virtual events to make those foreign missions aware of what is being happening, so that they'll be in a better position to promote this project. Again, those will also happen after the bill have been enacted.
Are you all also talking to the overseas diaspora?
Not at the moment, but as I said, we have certain marketing agents in place through them, and also by direct means through virtual events. The issue has been the restriction of travel due to. Yeah, we are planning.
Iran?
Yeah, I mean, no question.
Maybe you can say something about the chambers also.
Yeah, no question about the private sector's role in marketing, because I believe that the marketing must be led by the private sector. But obviously, the more fundamental issues, the foundation, the frameworks, the macro issues, are all the responsibilities of the government, and we should provide them with something they could actually go and sell. So I think that's where the big responsibility is for government. But otherwise, there is no question, and the private sector should be proactively basically looking at it. I won't say more than that about the chambers.
Okay. Iran, just one quick question before I ask Mr. Vikramasinghe to respond. Is there a potential opportunity for another financial center in South Asia, given that Mumbai is big and the scale is very different to what we are envisaging here?
Yeah, so I think that clearly our market, as I said, the location is the hub, and Sri Lanka is between East and West. right? And in terms of Middle East and Africa and the whole hub idea. And then in terms of our immediate market, it's the Indian subcontinent. There is no question about it for the next 30, 40 years. There's no question. And how we are going to actually, go into the Indian subcontinent, not just with logistics and transshipment, but in terms of services. Financial services can be a very important part of it. Now, if we don't get our fundamentals sorted out, political stability, macroeconomic policy, rule of law, right? The other things like enabling environment in terms of micro stuff, I'm sure we will always do that. If you don't get that fundamental thing sorted out, this opportunity can go to some other center that may get created in South Asia, because that's the opportunity.
Okay. Just one quick question. Nobody talked about Bangladesh. Why?
I won't rule out Bangladesh because when we were growing up as young people, right, and going to school, we had certain impressions created in our minds about India and Bangladesh and places like this, right? From social policy, educational policy, language policy to various things. The truth of the matter is, from being at the top of the scale, Sri Lanka slowly came down. Some of these countries actually emerged. And in more recent years, particularly in the last decade, Bangladesh has made huge strides economically, right? And not to be ruled out.
Thank you. Mr. Wickramasinghe, you can have the last word.
What do I say? I think I have said everything. I have to say, all I can say is get the act together. Yeah. In which case,
so in terms of the private sector, in terms of expectations from the private sector?
Well, as far as the private sector is concerned, we must carry out the economic reforms in the country, which gives the private sector more flexibility to operate. And then let those who are going out into the offshore sector go there. We should encourage them, maybe in partnership, maybe by themselves, but we should encourage as many as possible in the private sector to get involved in these activities. But then the government has to create the environment. You have to go to South Asia, speak to the 3 South Asian countries. Secondly, this must not be an enclave where you find they get special treatment. Whether you're a businessman, local businessman in the port city or outside, you operate the same. It maybe you get some tax concessions because you're doing offshore, but you must not create a special class inside the port city, which is not fair by the private sector outside. So finally, I would say, do the reforms where the private sector can work around. Policies, I don't know, they can change from time to time. Just look at the radical changes that Biden has made to Trump's tax policies. He just sent the tax rates up. He's put about 4 trillion into the pumping back into the. So those are things that you have to face. But I do agree, as far as possible, there has to be consistency. But if you give that flexibility to the private sector, when there are policy changes, they can adjust to it. We haven't got that now.
Thank you. Thank you. Damien, can I quickly ask you, you have been listening to all this. What are the 3 things that we need to focus on going forward to make the port city a winner?
Well, what I've been hearing, the 3 things are: 1, get the macroeconomic settings right; 2, get the project specifics right, using best practice, get the governance right; and then 3, make sure that this is really a collaborative process between public and private sectors. There are clear roles for each, but it's only going to be a successful project if they're working together successfully.
Thank you. Thank you very much on behalf of ICC. I'll hand you over to Arun.
Thank you very much. We've had quite an extensive analysis on the project. So I think pretty much we've come to appreciate that the economic, the trajectory, the economic growth trajectory can benefit from this port city project as a game changer. But I think the question has now been left tantalizingly up in the air. What is the game? and how is it going to be the changer. But before that, we would like to mention that the mayor of Colombo, Her Worship Rosie Senanayake, was also originally scheduled to be part of the panel, but was unavoidably prevented from being here. But she was keen that we would communicate her message. So I have it with me now, and I'm pleased to read that message from the mayor of Colombo so that we understand what her thinking is. So here's what she wished to have us hear. In my own perspective, the Port City project would have a significant impact on the economy of Sri Lanka, especially in terms of generating much needed foreign direct investments, together with the potential for fostering new employment and trade opportunities, which the project will help create over time. The estimated value of the FDIs that have already been infused by the project company, as communicated by them, is around $1 billion for the initial reclamation and associated infrastructure utilities development, with a further $400 million to be invested in due course to fulfill this scope. However, there must be full oversight by Parliament and special clauses which would provide for the overall supervisory authority, and also the regulatory authorities must be fully intact apart from the initial licenses or permits that will be issued by the Commission. Those issues ought to be with the strict concurrence of that yet need to be part of the game structure. That's what we were able to appreciate. The possibilities that do exist and the value that the port city can bring, I think, was pretty much emphasized throughout the presentation by the BCG people, Natarajan and Saurabh, and they did help us to appreciate that there is much that lays in store, considering the success stories of the models that do exist already. There are models that can be followed, whether they be in Dubai or Singapore or Ireland or even China. And also, investors can be key. The investors can contribute to what might be called a virtuous cycle, but there has to be deep understanding. And that's where some points were made by Riaz Mueller, that we need the best people. You just need to have the best people in the right place to be able to carry that forward. And I think we have now repeatedly had that mentioned, that the macro needs to be in order and in place, and the micro will turn out all right. Those can be handled. but we need to have the best people. And the market needs to be identified. Now, I think Mr. Vikramasinghe was helping us to appreciate you can't think in terms of an entire global market, but we have to focus, and it looks like it's going to be India, principal player, and who's going to be talking to them to be able to sell and so on, to be able to compete. So competition comes in, and the creating of the niche market to be able to stabilize the existing system to one that will be sellable or marketable to India will obviously come in. And I think we've also helped to appreciate that ultimately, even China is thinking in terms of the Indian market. So it's part of their Belt and Road project. So it cannot be isolated from any of that. So really, we are back again to being in the region and being able to contribute. So again, the value proposal really needs to be brought to bear. The game has to be sorted out, and a game plan has to be clearly identified to be able to move forward. So I think that's where we are. And we would like to mention that this program is going to be promoted on the platforms that have been set up. That's Facebook platforms for ICC, SL, Daily FT, and the ACCA FB or Facebook pages, as well as for Port City Colombo. And they have the additional platform that has been created in YouTube. So those will be promoted in the days ahead. And I know that this was also projected live on Channel 20 on Pure TV. I'm inclined to think that they will be able to repeat that too. So those of the audience that have been viewing this, if you think you have missed something or you want to review it, you want to hear it again to be able to understand what really is involved in this game-changing project, well, there's that opportunity. So saying that, we would like to conclude and say thank you very much for your participation and involvement. And again, mighty thanks to the panel who have stayed for this much time to be able to contribute in a vital way. Thank you very much. And we close with our sponsor videos. So we would like to invite the audience to view those to help you appreciate that there are partners with ICC Sri Lanka who have made this webinar possible. Thank you. And shall we say good night to all.
Thank you and good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
The International Chamber of Commerce Sri Lanka is the national office of the Paris-based business organization. The ICC comprises of membership of 45 million members in 130 countries. Trade facilitation, export and import and cross-border trade and issues relating to freight forwarding and many other matters of importance are addressed by the ICC. ICC Sri Lanka works through several committees to debate, discuss and suggest solutions on subjects related to the mandate of the Chamber. Each of these commissions are led by professionals in the committee, with many committees functioning. ICC includes a membership committee, International Relations Committee, Policy and Advocacy Committee, Training and Development Committee, Banking Committee. ICC is the sole authorized guaranteeing agency for ATIA. It's an internationally accepted customs document which enables duty-free and tax-free temporary importation of items as commercial samples. The ATIA reduces costs and red tape. The ICC is also known for its popular publications invaluable for bankers, lawyers, arbitrators and anyone involved in cross-border trade. Its members are provided with a member's privilege card which includes discounts with multiple retailers. ICC Sri Lanka's vision is to be the organization of choice to advance international trade and investment for businesses in Sri Lanka. ICC Sri Lanka's mission is to be the change agent in national policy formulation and implementation and facilitator of global businesses with Sri Lanka and disseminator of information on the development of business utilizing the services of ICC Paris while continuing to be a facilitator of dispute resolution. In addition, the ICC Sri Lanka organizes seminars, lectures, meetings with business leaders, and gives recognition to Sri Lankan businesses for outstanding achievements. ICC can play a special role in connecting business to the world and be a driving force for all Sri Lankan businesses.
If you seek for business, look for insightful. If you seek for politics, look for anticipation. If you value lifestyle, look for the extraordinary. If you love sports, look for the passion. Daily FT. Be empowered.
ACCA has been the game-changing moment in my journey, and I'm sure it will be the same for you as well.
Get out of the comfort zone, keep investing in your existing technical skills and more, which is all what ACCA does.
So ACCA definitely helped me in my career. I was able to achieve my career aspiration of being a head of finance of a $200 million business, and I was able to carry out that role very successfully, and it will definitely help in yours.
It has helped me a lot to move across industries and to come to this level as being a CEO.